Hi, hey, yo, sup, all you dudes and dudettes. My name is Gnator84, and just as I managed to in 2022, I've seen every film the Oscars nominated for Best Picture this year in advance. Now, last year was a very eventful one at the movies, so we've got quite the variety of titles up for the top prize this year that I'm very eager to discuss with you all. So, without further delay,
the nominees for Best Motion Picture of the Year are
American Fiction.
Well, if you've seen the movie, there is something enjoyably ironic about it getting nominated. Anyway, we're off to a great start. This was a really enjoyable watch, and the more I've thought about it afterwards, the better it's gotten. I love how the movie is an exploration of stereotypes becoming a preconception for black storytelling, and surrounds the main character by a family who could so easily be stereotyped, yet none of them feel defined by one single trait. They're vibrant, lived-in, three-dimensional characters. It's such a smart compliment to the extremely funny and interesting satire, which plays great with an audience. Certain parts were a real riot. And both sides of the story are anchored by a really nice vibe and a very strong cast, the highlights of which are easily Jeffrey Wright and Sterling K. Brown. And a quick side note, I have to say the Best Supporting Actor lineup this year is insanely strong. And I'll be touching on a lot of those terrific performances throughout this video. American Fiction is kind of the ideal Oscars film. It offers thought-provoking commentary and drama whilst being hugely accessible, a ton of fun to watch, and with characters you really warm to. I thought it was great and would happily watch it again. Alright, cool, good stuff. So, next up,
Anatomy of a Fall.
Yes, I think you'll find that's actually Palm Dog winner Anatomy of a Fall. Now, I heard a lot of hype for Sandra Hüller's performance going into this, and while it's easy to point at her big argument scene as the main reason why, it's the smaller moments where a character isn't doing anything particularly extraordinary that, to me, best showcase what an extraordinary performance this is. It does not feel like she's acting at all. There's a very small bit where she has a quick joke with the lawyer. I actually rewound, it felt so real. She's brilliant in this, and the rest of the cast also do a great job. As for the rest of the movie, it's very good, although I felt it lulled in a few spots. I was surprised to see a couple of reviewers say it took them a while to get into it, because my favourite stretch was the beginning at the house. Seeing the recreations of and the characters coping with the incident was very captivating to me. I really liked the ambiguity with which this explored the case. I spent a lot of the movie thinking she had done it, but the film makes very persuasive arguments for and against her guilt, which, by the end, still has me unsure which side I land on. I'd have preferred the court case half to have had snappier pacing, and for a usually intelligent screenplay, I'm still not convinced the whole thing with the husband recording their conversations wasn't a bit contrived, but this is a very engaging watch overall, and I've still got that damn song in my head.
Barbie.
I know given its massive success and the whole event of Barbenheimer that this was expected to do well come award season, but still, when you really think about it, it's kind of mad that this comedy blockbuster based off a toy brand amassed 8 Oscar nominations. But anyway, putting all that aside, the movie on its own is pretty good fun. I remember my cheeks hurting from smiling throughout the first 15 minutes. Seeing the mechanics of this world and all the comedy which stemmed from that was a real delight. The production design is pretty stellar. It really does feel as though they somehow shrunk the actors down into a toy set, and the massive ensemble is a lot of fun, the highlights of which being Margot Robbie and Helen Mirren as the narrator, who both fit the tone of the movie like a glove, and, of course, Ryan freaking Gosling. He delivers an absolute comedic tour de force as Ken. All of his line deliveries, expressions, and gestures are inherently funny. There's really only one word to describe his performance:
sublime!
I will admit a rewatch at home really made me realize how much better the start and end are than the middle stretch, which I find a little pedestrian. I don't particularly care for the way the commentary is executed, and while an easy defense against that point is I'm a guy, I couldn't help but notice the blunt, funny way the Barbies and Kens talk is just how everyone in this movie talks, and so the real world scenes aren't as impactful as they could have been. Sasha's whole rant to Barbie is really lame, and while the big monologue is well delivered, it never doesn't feel like a monologue. And on that note, while America Ferrera is decent, a Best Supporting Actress nomination is absolutely ridiculous. I was watching the whole second act on this rewatch, thinking I was starting to find the movie a bit overrated, but then we get to the delightful insanity of I'm Just Ken and I was won back over. The whole finale is a blast. So many parts where you can't believe Gerwig and Baumbach got away with some of this stuff in a Barbie movie. And even though a lot of the more serious parts of the film don't work for me, both poignant moments featuring old women I do find very powerful, and that line at the end about mothers and daughters may just be the defining line of Greta Gerwig's career so far. Barbie is a slightly clunky watch, but its highs are a real joy to experience.
The Holdovers.
Picture her as Paul Giamatti.
I can't remember the last time I felt so immersed in a film's world that it felt genuinely strange to walk back out into reality afterwards, but within the first few minutes of The Holdovers, I was sucked into its old school atmosphere and immediately drawn towards its wonderful characters who only got more interesting the further along their dynamics grew. Despite going to some heavy places, watching these broken people find some semblance of a connection with one another against the Christmassy backdrop made this a lovely, lovely film. I realize describing it that way may make it sound cliche, but it's really not. These relationships don't evolve into incredible bonds or make Giamatti no longer a curmudgeon or anything. They simply grow a mutual respect and understanding of one another by the end, which allows them to move on from the past. And the development for all three characters is frequently funny, moving, and always entertaining. And the performances are absolutely fantastic. I can't believe this is Dominic Sessa's first movie, and there's a bit early on where Giamatti loses it with one of the students for just a moment before stopping himself, and it is a stupendously brilliant bit of acting. I had a feeling I'd like this movie considering what a big fan I am of Alexander Payne's Election, which I highly recommend by the way. And yeah, it was an absolute pleasure to watch, and it feels like with time it'll only go up in my estimations.
Killers of the Flower Moon.
Let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. I saw this movie in cinemas and god damn was the runtime testing! The thing is, the story is told and paced in such a way that lent itself to having an intermission just before the FBI show up. I would have been able to enjoy the last act more had I had the chance to get up and stretch my legs for a few minutes. Okay, so with that addressed and having had time to process it, the movie itself I think is pretty good. It's undeniably a quality piece of work, well made and very well acted. It's really interesting to see a big star like DiCaprio play such a pushover character, De Niro delivers a great, subtly slimy performance, and Lily Gladstone really sells her devastated moments. With that said, I can't say I was ever fully emotionally invested in it, which I have felt with a few of the Scorsese films I've seen. I get a bit more into his darkly humorous work than his more serious, dramatic ones, which probably also explains why the way Killers of the Flower Moon ends was my favourite part of the whole thing. I really liked that scene. It's a good film, it just didn't have a particularly visceral effect on me, and I do think there is a shot it's not going to walk away with anything come Oscars night.
Maestro.
So I saw this at the London Film Festival back in October along with The Boy and the Heron, and I'm definitely glad I didn't see this first at home on Netflix like most people would, because seeing it big and loud added a lot of oomph to the overall experience. Despite trying not to be, Maestro does feel very much like style over substance. The scene-to-scene progression feels a bit fragmented and can be pretty slow at times. And like a lot of people, I wish this struck a better balance between being about their relationship and Bernstein's career, because his musical accomplishments aren't touched on anywhere near enough. But with that said, the style of it does make it very watchable. Firstly, it's visually stunning, and it had deserved to win cinematography solely on the merit of this shot, and the use of music made me a bigger fan of Leonard Bernstein beyond West Side Story. There's some very engrossing acting showcases, and while it's hard to argue against those who claim this is just Oscar bait, I do think it's more creative than it's getting credit for. It takes some bold swings that I very much enjoyed. I get why some people hate it, and Bradley Cooper's A Star Is Born is easily the more emotionally effective film, but there have been far worse attempts at Oscar bait, and I found quite a bit of entertainment in the bravado on display.
Oppenheimer.
This is an interesting one, because my grievances with it prevent me from fully embracing its whole, and yet the things I love about it, I really love. When I first saw it, I thought my issues boiled down to the fact that incredibly dialogue-driven films aren't always my cup of tea, but rewatching at home, the early life stuff and Strauss's petty vengeance isn't as investing to me as the building of and Oppenheimer's internal conflict over the atomic bomb. Not to say those parts aren't interesting, although the first act does feel very jumpy, but I'm more fascinated by this man grappling with the weight of the world on his shoulders than what the first and last acts predominantly focus on. And while I like how overwhelming an experience it is, I feel like some of the information being delivered could have easily been condensed and not lost much in the long run. But with that said, I don't have much of an issue with the running time, surprisingly enough. This thing moves with a great sense of scope, energy, and momentum that keeps it consistently interesting, and like I said, what is good here is insanely good. I love the wonderfully foreboding opening and ending scenes, all of the surreal nightmarish parts work great, and the Trinity test is an amazing piece of cinematic spectacle. The massive ensemble is rather excellent, it's fun the first time to keep going, holy crap, they're in this too! And I really hope Cillian Murphy gets the Oscar for Best Actor. Many of his most powerful scenes are all in the eyes. The other person who I really want to walk away with a trophy here is Ludwig Göransson. This soundtrack is already an all-time favorite of mine. A lot of the power and momentum I do get from this film is largely down to the music being such a presence throughout. It is bits and pieces of this movie which left an impression on me more than the whole thing, but those bits and pieces are things which have properly stuck with me since first seeing it. And as a big fan of Christopher Nolan, I really do hope this yields him awards glory, and I really do think it is going to. It seems like the right time and project for an icon of directing to finally get his awards due, so if this does wind up getting the top prize, you won't hear me complain.
Past lives.
This seems to have topped a lot of people's best of the year list, and while it's not really close to cracking my own top 10, I do like it very much. It's basically if the Before trilogy was a single movie, and while the conversations aren't quite as richly compelling as in those films, and I do think it rushes through the childhood and Skype bonding scenes a little, once it slows down and lets the dynamics and emotions breathe, it is a very engaging watch. The characters and their dynamics are interesting, those Skype parts did evoke the joys of great video calls for me, and I enjoy how prominent the locations feel in every scene. I also really like the relationship between Nora and her husband, and how despite being put in a very awkward situation, he remains level-headed about the whole thing and she allows him to voice his thoughts on the matter in a mature, understanding way. These quieter dramas just aren't often things I find myself rating that highly. Before Sunrise and Sunset are exceptions, But I do like this movie a lot and find its exploration of the bittersweet pain at what wasn't to be, especially in its ending, very poignant.
Poor Things.
Well, that's a massive L for the anti-sex scenes crowd. There used to be a time when a movie as oddball as this one would have never stood a chance of getting into the Oscars, so the fact that this has been a frontrunner for a while is pretty damn cool. This was my first time watching a Yorgos Lanthimos film, and it was just as bizarre and uniquely shot as I hoped given his reputation. This is essentially an adult fairy tale, and the loopy score and spectacular production design really engage you into this strange and interesting world. What took me most by surprise about Poor Things is just how much of a comedy it is. The story is basically a fish out of water, Frankenstein-type tale, and there is a lot of humor around Bella Baxter being a child in a grown woman's body. That is kinda messed up the more you think about it, but in the moment I chuckled a lot. Most of what Mark Ruffalo does here I find really funny, and Emma Stone delivers a totally uninhibited performance. She really goes for it in big ways, but what I found most impressive about her work here is the subtlety of Bella's growth throughout the movie. There's a clear difference between the way she acts at the start and at the end of the story, yet you never notice that development explicitly happen. It's very organically done, and a second Oscar for Stone would be very well deserved. The movie dragged a bit by the end. The whole conflict of the last stretch comes almost out of nowhere when it looks like it's about to wrap up, but aside from that, I enjoyed Poor Things a lot and think it would make for a very interesting double bill with Barbie of all things. And finishing us off, we have...
The Zone of Interest.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Look, I think the central idea of this family going about their workaday lives whilst these unseen horrors unfold right on their doorstep is an interesting one. It looks great, the sound design is impactful, and Sandra Hüller once again doesn't feel like she's acting at all. I actually saw this before I saw Anatomy of a Fall, fun fact. But there is an awful lot of nothing going on here, and the point it's trying to get across is made very early on without the rest of the movie really expanding upon it. I spent the back half of the first act thinking, is this all there is going to be to it? Then the second starts to have a little bit of character drama, which is also where the slow pace started to become hypnotizing, and it was starting to work for me there. But once I was snapped out of that trance and the main action moves away from the house, I found the last third incredibly boring. The art house approach this takes I think would make for a really effective 30-minute short, keeping in all the jarring moments like that fade to red, but it just didn't work for me as a feature. I get the acclaim for it, but I thought it was a little one note and I was more than ready for it to be over during the last stretch. And those are the nominees. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Let me know which films you'll be rooting for come Oscars night, and I shall see you all next time. Goodbye.